Hello. So today I just sketched some new La Mancha art and I wanted to paint it up real quick. So a little bit of background. So this is some artwork, illustrations of the book Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes, and I am Chris Totten. And I designed a game based on Don Quixote called La Mancha. Let me get the game box out. Called La Mancha. And in this card game, it's a storytelling game, and you tell stories based on this book, Don Quixote, and it features situations from the novel, characters from the novel. You tell stories based on scenes from the novel, which is what I'm painting right now, but then there's also characters to declare love to. You can screw with the other players, and you try to overcome great feats and be the winner. So it was just this past weekend successfully funded on Kickstarter, and one of the things that I am doing and that I have promised my backers is to do live streams of the painting process. Now, I don't always do these at like a regular time, simply because of scheduling and things like that, real life stuff. But I figured if I can at least get some of these painting sessions streamed, and then I can videotape them and distribute them via YouTube and things like that. So that's what I'm doing. So what we are painting today, what I'm painting today, is two scenes from Don Quixote. One, the one that I'm putting water on now, is from the second volume of Don Quixote. So Don Quixote, for those who don't know, is a book by Miguel de Cervantes, written or published. The first book was published in 1605. The second book was published in 1615, and it's a story about a man who decides that he is going to become a wandering knight, much to the chagrin of the people around him. And he goes on these adventures with a squire named Sancho Panza, and he and Sancho see lots of crazy things, do lots of crazy things. So what we're looking at right now is in this scene that I have laid out. So I'm doing two scenes today. One of them is Don Quixote and Sancho going to a village, and Don Quixote believes that in this village he will meet his lady love, Dulcinea del Toboso. So he and Sancho are in El Toboso, and Sancho knows that, or suspects that, there is no real Dulcinea, but he wants to keep the ruse alive, again, because this is a story about a man who believes himself a wandering knight, but when he is just a normal person, and he's a wandering knight in an era where there are no more wandering knights. So he's going to go visit his lady love. Sancho knows a bit better, so he lies to Don Quixote and says, yes, that is your lady love coming down the road right now. Don Quixote says, that looks just like a regular peasant woman, and it leads off on a whole series of adventures where Don Quixote believes that Dulcinea has been enchanted to look like a peasant, and he spends most of book two trying to find a way to disenchant her of this spell. So this is the scene where we see that happen. And so Sancho says, "Yes, that is your lady love." Don Quixote, even though he does not see a beautiful Dulcinea, decides, well, I'd better, you know, do what a chivalrous knight would do and declare my love for her anyway. And he does so, and the women there's one pictured here, but in the book there are 3 women. The women there get quite offended by his acknowledging that she is not they are not what he expected, and beat him and Sancho up. So we are seeing that in this scene right here. The other scene that I will be painting is a scene from the first book where Don Quixote happens upon some prisoners, some men being sent to the galleys, and he says, well, I need to save anybody in need, and everybody around him is like, no, 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 they are criminals, please don't free the criminals. And he frees the criminals, and the criminals beat up their guards, escape, and actually beat up Don Quixote and Sancho a bit. A lot of the stories in Don Quixote end with Don Quixote and Sancho getting beat up. Which, both of these are pretty comedic scenes. One, because of the just social absurdity of Don Quixote trying to declare his love to this woman, and the other because of the absurdity of Don Quixote doing what he thinks is a heroic act, which is in fact he's freeing criminals. So let's see, what do I want to do here? Let me look at a reference real quick. And journey cards. How do I want to plan this character's outfit out? I think I know. Okay, I think I'm actually oops, I didn't want to open Krita. All right, I think I know what I'm going to do. All right, why don't I get a bigger brush? All right, so a bit about what I'm doing here. All of the illustrations in the game are going to be done with watercolor paint, and there we go. They're going to be done with watercolor, and that is what I'm doing right now. I'm using real watercolor paint to do these game illustrations, and I like doing this with my illustrations for projects when I can, simply because I think it just gives it a nice real-world feeling that you don't see in a lot of other games. So often games are illustrated with digital paint and things like that, and digital paint looks really good, don't get me wrong, but I've done so much digital paint that I'm almost tired of it. I really want to go back to basics and have some work that really, at the end of the day, I can hang on my wall and say, hey, look at that, I made that, which is a lot of fun. That's a lot of fun when you do have something like that you can then keep with you. Okay. So I'm doing one of these paintings at a time. I don't want to go too crazy with trying to do two at once. I'm keeping it simple for myself. And you'll notice one of the things I love about watercolor is that once they dry up, you can easily get them going again. So as you can see here, I have just lots and lots of watercolor paint stored up on my palette from, you know, past paintings from this series. And that makes it a very economical medium to work in. I am all about saving on materials and things like that. So this is kind of nice to be able to go back and go and be able to use and reuse color. So what I usually do when I watercolor paint like this is I lay down some base colors, and that's what I'm doing right now. And I don't really do too much shading at the beginning. I've done a little bit, just a very tiny amount, but nothing too major. And what that'll help do is if I can get a base coat down and then go in and do some of the detailing later, that'll let the base coat dry a little bit. I guess I could, that won't be a big deal. One of the things I love about watercolors is its materiality. So see here I put down maybe a little bit more gray than I wanted to in this section. So I can take this and then rip up a corner of this paper and lift the watercolor off. And now it's not quite so thick, see? And that helps me adjust. It's a very in that way, it's a really forgiving medium. The stakes are a little lower when you put paint down, and if you screw up, again, you can lift it up pretty easily. You can dilute it pretty easily. See, I put even a little bit more there than I wanted to. Boop, boop, boop. Here we go. And then I can go back and fix. Cool. So, seeing if anything else if there's anything else I want to make gray. I don't think at the moment. Maybe I might shade the woman's shirt gray a little bit, but I want to use some white paint and maybe a little bit of erasing to clean that up before I really go in. Let me really quickly, I don't think anybody is going to be on the stream, but let me see if anybody is on the stream on Twitch. Oops. There it is. Okay. Sorry about that. What should I do next? I think I will do... let me go back to brown. I have some brown parts to paint. Put down a little bit base color. Okay, Don Quixote's. Let's see, what else can I do? I might do the mule in a brown, maybe a little bit darker brown here. Again, just applying a base coat to start with. Not going to do anything too crazy yet with shading or coloring. And really, for a painting that's going to be displayed this small, it's good to not do anything too elaborate anyway. Often what will happen is if you make a painting too elaborate, then because this is going to be displayed on a playing card, ultimately, you will end up making something that's too busy for the playing card. And there's a few of these that I think might have a little bit, might be a little over detailed, but so far it seems to be working out. None of the players have really said anything. One of the things I want to do here is, because this is a donkey character and I'm going to have it be fairly expressive as it looks at Don Quixote kind of side-eyed here, is that I want to make it visually distinct from one of the characters in the novel, who is Sancho's gray donkey, which in the novel is never named this. I included the name because it's in a few pieces of Don Quixote related media, Dapple. So I have Dapple the donkey, which is Sancho's donkey, and I wanted to make sure that this donkey, for example, is visually distinct from that donkey, because this is not Sancho's donkey. This is the mule of the woman that Don Quixote mistakens for Dulcinea. And that's going to, we don't want to get those confused. So I thought I would make this a brown donkey as opposed to a gray donkey, or mule, whichever. Going to lay down a little more color so this donkey's color is a little richer, so it's not just kind of like enhanced white. I don't want it to be too light, but I don't want it to be too dark either. Okay. Again, this is the nice thing about watercolor, is that I can wet a brush and drag pigment around, and then, yeah, there we go. Suddenly, that's pretty good. I like that. Let me get a little more brown down here. Cool. And then I'm going to give this woman gray shoes, just so that you can distinguish them a bit from her donkey. Black, darken this gray up a little bit. We'll need some darker gray just for Don Quixote's detailing here in a second, but it's good to use for this character as well. Okay, cool. So now I'm going to detail this, I'm going to continue to detail this woman here a little bit. I've decided the light is going to come from this direction. So yeah, because of the way it's hitting the donkey. So there's really no science to that. You know, I've had former students that have asked me that it's almost like somebody new to art. People that are very new to art tend to overthink art, and I've had former students say, well, for example, you know, oh no, I want to learn how to draw. What's the best way to position my arm to learn how to draw? And I'll say, don't think of it like that. It has nothing to do with that. The way I've always held my arm, for example, is probably the way that they like teach you not to hold your arm when you're learning how to write. But it just happened to be what worked for me. I think I need some white. Yeah, I'm gonna put some white on my palette. But I've had people ask me, you know, things like that, where it's like, well, how do I do this? How do I do that? And they're always asking it from the standpoint of this really strict physical reality or something to that effect. And I always tell them, you know, it has nothing to do with, the first thing you need to do with art is relax and understand that it's really just about making things and really expressing ideas and trying things out. And art's a very organic process. You know, it's like Bob Ross said, you know, embrace happy accidents and all that stuff. That's what we do here. We make happy accidents and we embrace them. And sometimes the happy accidents are what makes our art really great. Okay, there, I've cleaned up that part of the character a little bit so that now you don't see all the pencil lines going through. And for the background, you know, pencil lines and eraser lines, I can Photoshop that out when I scan this in. So that'll be nice. Okay, let me move this around a little bit. And because this is wet, it's really, I can let it dilute a little bit. There we go. And that might be too much gray over there, so there we go, that's better. There we go. All right, that's better. I like that. And then let me take some of this darker gray over here and oops, I think I got a bristle in there. There we go. Sometimes I put, because they're kind of, you know, illustrative characters, sometimes I'll just put a little outline when I need to emphasize things on them. It depends on the drawing. Some of them need it, some of them don't. I think this one will be pretty clear without, but there we go. and that helps define the characters a little bit more. Cool. All right, so we've got her blouse in order. I'm going to do her, I'm going to finish off her skirt a little bit. I'm going to take some of this blue and mix it with some black. As you can see, I'm not too strict about where I put colors and things like that on my palette. You know, they're all gonna come together anyway. And one thing that I try to emphasize when I paint, but also when I teach others to paint, is don't overwork things you're unsure about. Like here, for example, I have the character's skirt, and I was really unsure drawing it. I looked at a few references of you know, women riding horses and donkeys in a skirt and things like that, sort of side saddle stuff, and you know, I couldn't get it to be quite where I was 100% happy with it. And you kind of get used to doing this. It's not something that you can develop overnight, but I really just told myself, you know, don't overdo it. You know, paint it. It's going to come out the way it's going to come out, and the less time you spend on it, the better it'll feel. And I mean, this feels okay to me. It's not perfect, but that's okay. I mainly want to get it done, and you know, it's think about how a viewer is going to be doing this. If this is supposed to be something where you are showing off the mastery of your technique, then yeah, you might want to do more exacting rendering of it. But in our case today, this is something that's ultimately going to be, again, displayed on a playing card, and I don't want to belabor a detail that's going to be very small, or that, you know, again, could really sink a whole composition if you try to overdo it. So I'm going to add some shading under there. Let's use this to create outline so you can see kind of what's going on. And all right, cool. That's pretty good. I think I can stop there. All right. So let's see, what else what shall I do next? Maybe we'll work on some of these bigger chunks of Sancho. So Sancho I have made with blue, sort of like baggy blue pants, but maybe more of like a bluish gray, which there's some of that down there. There, it's better. Let's spread that around. His base color down. There we go. And let's see. Also, I want Sancho to look like he's, some of his stuff is made out of slightly poorer materials. So I give him a slightly more yellowed shirt instead of like a clean white shirt. And again, just putting down the base color, and then I will come back and do the full color. Okay. And Sancho has, I think I need to mix up some new darker brown. So I'm gonna take some black and bring it over to where my brown is, water this down a little bit. Mix it all together. Okay, now I have darker brown. Okay. Now let's see. Oh yeah. Oops, I forgot something here. That's okay. There we go. Cool. Now I'm going to take my darker brown. I'm going to do Sancho's belt. And then I'm going to take some of this yellow ochre color because that is the color of Sancho's hat. I'm also going to use it as a mid-tone for Don Quixote's golden helmet. Now at this point of the story, it's a little unclear whether Don Quixote still has the golden helmet. This is supposed to be a few months after part 1. Or not too long after part 1. Again, this is in part 2. But I like to draw Don Quixote with his golden helmet. One, it's the iconic look of this character. But two, there is a very distinct point in the first book where he receives it, and then there is a very distinct point. It's very, very generic later on. Oops. Sorry, got an email. There's a very distinct point where he receives the golden helmet, and then there's another. It's a little more general whether he has it later on or not. So I usually try to draw him with it. I happen to like drawing him with it in the parts of the story where he very distinctly has it. Otherwise, I kind of, earlier in the story, the parts before he has it, I try to keep it true to the book. So like you'll see on the box art, Don Quixote has a helmet. I don't even know if it's on the screen right now because I'm watching the stream and it's not quite live. Let's see. Yay! So he has his helmet there that he leaves his house with, that is destroyed by the windmills, and then for a while he just has nothing, and then eventually he gets the golden helmet. So I again draw him with it after the episode, in these episodes that occur after the golden helmet episode, simply because I like I like it when he has it. So I make him have it all the time. All right, so I'm going to take a little bit of black and mix it in with some of this bluish gray. And then that will, oh, too dark, too dark. I'll just take what I applied and spread it around a little bit. So what I do sometimes when I do have some of these shapes that, you know, maybe like I have Sancho's legs here, and I mean they obviously have some definition, but I think the thing that I can really do so I don't that keeps me almost from over detailing things I don't want to over detail. Sometimes what I'll do is I will just after all this is said and done, paint some grass on the front and then have a nice grass detail there, and that way it sort of de-emphasizes things, it covers them up. I guess covers them up is the wrong phrasing, but it makes it so that you don't feel that you have to over detail things that don't need to be over detailed, and I'll show you what I mean in a little bit here. Just adding some white spots to Sancho's clothes. And then I'll let that dry and see what that turns into, and then edit from there. I think our Sancho's pants have dried a little bit. Let me add another round of that. See, watercolor is all about laying down a base color and then building dark shading into it bit by bit. Oil paint, you start with the dark and then bring out light colors. Watercolor, it's in reverse. You start with light colors and then build darker colors. Oops. Oh, that's not going to be so bad, but let me still sometimes I will do both. Sometimes I'll add a lighter color on top of a darker color just as a highlight. I've honestly found that as I've been digitally painting, it's made my fine art skills that much better. Drop of water. Okay, cool. All right, there we go. I like that. And let me maybe add some detail down here. Okay, so there's Sancho so far. Now what I'm going to do is paint. I'm going to work on Don Quixote's armor. So before I had this gray color. Now I'm going to take some of it and make it a lighter gray. And that lighter gray will also help me paint his beard. Actually, that might just be the same gray. Let's see. I'm almost building myself like a little spectrum of gray down here. There we go. Wasn't quite light enough. So I'm going to boop. So in this case, I'm almost breaking my own rule. I started with a darker color, and now I'm painting with a lighter color. It's like I always tell my students, do as I say, not as I do. Alright, so that's a little bit better. Now what I'm going to do is take my smaller brush, a very teeny tiny detailing brush. I'm going to make some white highlights on him. Because his armor, I usually paint it as kind of shiny. Try not to make it too shiny, simply because it is supposed to be battered and old. And that's part of the point, is that Don Quixote uses rusty old armor. So try not to make it as bright and shiny as other characters' armor, because there are other knights in the book, usually people who are pretending to be knights to trick Don Quixote into jousting them and then making bets of like, well, you have to give up being a knight. It's people trying to essentially bring him home and snap him out of his fantasies. But you know, there are other characters that have very shining armor when compared to Don Quixote's. But I like to make it a little shiny. That way, you know, it's good for I think painting the character and making him visually stand out when he needs to, All right, now I'm actually going to take, now I'm going to make a darker color to paint on him so that we can get, again, just some visual detail. Maybe some slight outlining of features. And I find that doing, with these characters especially, a little bit of an outline helps, I think, lock down details and the cleanliness of details. Because I think it is good to have clearly readable details. Like if I was doing a, you know, regular realistic still life or something like that, I wouldn't necessarily do outlines. But part of this is readability. I'm realizing that I'm leaning in pretty close to the camera, so I apologize for that. But I think it is good in certain cases, and I think this is one, to have something, something of a guideline so that you can be able to figure out what the details are. Again, especially when we are looking at this piece that is ultimately going to be displayed on a playing card. So the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my slightly thicker brush and let me add a little more detailing. Okay. Let me do the feet. Cool. I think that'll be fine. And then I'm going to take this darker color again and do some just general shading. This may be too dark, too much water. Watercolor can be tough. It's not, you know, especially if you're fighting like drippy water and things like that coming off of your brush. It can be a little difficult and unruly. But if you get an idea with it and or if you get some practice with it, and you are the type who can roll with some punches, it's a really great medium to paint in. Okay, cool. So we've got our 3 characters mostly painted. Well, 4 if you count the donkey. I could probably do some more detailing on the donkey, but before that, let me actually get into faces and everything. I usually do the faces last. I couldn't tell you why. It's just some weird habit that I developed over time. I don't know, maybe I find their faces to be a little less intimidating. I'm going to add a little tan to Sancho's skin tone for for several reasons. One, I think he would be a little more tanned than other characters, just because of his lifestyle. And two, and I I'm not gonna. I've got to keep on model. But some characters, what I've been trying to do in this is diversify the cast a little bit. And Sancho throughout the game appears, pretty Caucasian, but I try to, when I can, and especially in certain settings, give him a little more tan skin tone because he is supposed to be a little poorer. Well, not a little poor. He is poor. Whereas other characters, like I have flat out made different races. Again, I think I was even reading an article today, this morning, about representation in board games, and I think it's something that's generally very good and that I'm very much in favor of. So I try to do it in my own games. One of the historic things that I think also makes characters of different skin tones very appropriate, and I realize that in this painting I am not painting with that many skin tones, not huge variations. I've been using various shades in this one, but I haven't done too much variation. But in others, I have varied characters pretty wildly, and there's the just general seeking of making a game with a little better representation, but also one of the things that in Spain at the time, they were dealing with the aftermath of the Moorish occupation of Spain, and you saw, so there have been several hundred years of people with different skin tones inhabiting Spain, and then you have in 1615, and in the text of Don Quixote itself, very direct allusions to the expulsion of people of Moorish descent from Spain. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting with that is there are characters who are Moorish, Muslim, in the game or in the book, and that have like their race and religion has very direct things going on in that world. So I wanted to honor that, but also use it as an opportunity to have more diversity in how characters are painted. So you'll see throughout the books, especially in the character cards, some characters of diverse descent, and then characters that I may have used some artistic license to give maybe a darker skin color than is implied in the book. And the reason for that being, why not? Why couldn't somebody have a mixed background in that type of environment? I think it's very appropriate. Sorry again for my big head being in the way. Trying to get There we go. Okay. I gave Sancho a missing tooth to one of the things that I've often think of is what version of Don Quixote is going through my head. And when I say version, I mean like performances, because there are various performances of Don Quixote in theater, through the musical Man of La Mancha and things like that. And one of the things that I've decided is that in oh, I forgot to paint Don Quixote's neck. That is weird. One of the things I've decided is that if you go to the Internet Archive, you can find a radio play made for NPR in the 1980s for a group called Globe Radio Repertory. And they have a performance of Don Quixote that is really wonderful. But the Don Quixote and Sancho there are just so perfect. And I was actually, I'll admit, I was actually really struggling with this Sancho today. And the reason for that being because I hadn't really planned him to ever have his hat off. I've had him in other types of hats, but I've never painted him with his hat off. And in having to do so for the first time today, I was like, oh my goodness, what does he look like with his hat off? That's actually kind of a challenge. And I painted, the reason that the drawing was so chewed up was for that very reason. I didn't know what he looked like without it. I hadn't done any concepts or anything with that. So I had to erase, paint again, or draw again, erase, draw again, erase, draw again. And it, I eventually, and this is going to sound kind of weird, but I tried to figure out, okay, well, I hear that voice from that particular radio play, but what does that character have? And I was like, the actor, I can't remember the actor's name, but he does a really good job of, having this character that is, as in the book, very wise, but and does a really great job delivering all of Sancho's proverbs, but then has like a kind of rough way about him as a peasant farmer like Sancho would. And I'm just like, you know what? I really feel like he might be missing a tooth. like just in my head, something about that just, it seemed right. And then I painted it when I couldn't think of anything else, and I was like, aha, yep, that's it. That is it. There he is. There's Sancho. There's my Sancho. Back. Even without his hat. I've found him. It was almost like he was, in some variations, like too young. Then I would paint something, and then he'd be suddenly too old. So he's supposed to be a man in his like 30s. Make sure I don't have too much material on here. I watered it down too much. If I absolutely had to, sorry, I'm getting in the way again, but I really needed to take a look at Sancho up close. If I really had to, really had to, I have some pens that I could use to really, I guess, finish off some of these details, and I might do that. For Don Quixote's face. We'll see. Alright, so let's do Don Quixote's... I guess we gotta do his helmet too. Let me just do his beard. I think I'll just do this one painting in this stream, and then I will do the other one later. That's not bad. I don't know the artist. I should really look this up, but I base Don Quixote's kind of scraggly hair on this one illustration of him. Again, I don't know the artist. I will try to look it up, so when I cite this, I can properly give credit. But there's this illustration of Don Quixote where it looks it's simultaneously a picture of Don Quixote and a windmill, and he's not wearing his helmet, and it gives him this like crazed look, and I really liked that. I really like that piece of art, and so I decided, like, hey, maybe this should be, when he takes his helmet off, this is what his hair looks like. It's kind of outrageous, and I like the idea of, and Sancho is a little bit to this effect too. That was the other detail that when I added it, I was like, okay, there's Sancho. He had much less hair, and then I gave him a little bit more like curly hair, and I was like, yeah, there he is. Okay, there's Sancho. And I'll add a little pink to Sancho, because again, I like him to have some markings of working in the sun. And I mean, by this point in the story, they really both would have those markings, but again, these versions of the characters are almost symbol as much as they are literal, meaning that because you're not dealing with them in any sort of chronological order, I'm giving them more markings of their station and who they are before they were in this story than necessarily an accurate depiction of what happens to them throughout the story. Again, some details I've used, but others I am purposefully, like Sancho usually has a suntan, Don Quixote usually has his helmet, because that's the iconic look of Don Quixote. There we go. Okay, and now this other character, again, I've made her skin color a little darker. Oops, saw a big drop of water come down and I didn't catch it in time. Sorry, my dog is hearing things outside. All right, and then to finish this off, well, okay, let me quickly paint the golden helmet. Oops, trying not to get my paintbrush tangled with my webcam cord. Let me pick up some of this. Here's an instance where I am most definitely building light to dark. All right, that's probably good enough. And then what I'm going to do is take my bigger brush and start to paint in some grassy areas. I'm taking from this big swatch of, because I don't want there to be this like perfect green verdant grass. I want it to be kind of, you know, darker, a little wilder, I say, as I put down a very nice bright green, but that's fine. So this is like the roadside, and then I'm going to fill in with, maybe lift some black. There we go, that's better. I want more of like a huntery kind of green. And remove some material. There we go. Now I'm painting with more paint. Yeah, I'm going to block out some colors here. So we're going to have sort of the roadside, and then some roadside here on the other side, and then I want them to be on the road. And there's a few other details like these reins I got to do, but I can work that out after the stream. I just want to more or less finish it off. I want to do a road because they're like supposed to be meeting. This all happens like by the roadside, so. Then I'm going to use my ochre. Mix that with a little brown. There we go, that's better. Alright, and then I will again take this brush and add some wispiness. Let me just make sure, yeah, it's pretty even. And they look kind of like they're floating a little bit right now, and I will, once this dries a bit, I'm going to add some shadows to everything so that we can see that our characters are actually existing in this world and not just kind of painted onto a color, painted onto a background. So that will more or less do it for this painting video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was relaxing for you as it was for me. And I will see you next time and post pictures when this is done. Thank you. Oh, and sorry if the focus keeps going out.